Everybody. This is CUDA Open Lab seminar on April 8, 2024. And today it's our greatest pleasure to have Clarisse Bardiot, who will talk about digital humanities, moving images, actually from stage to data, the digital turn of contemporary performing arts historiography, which is an ERC advanced grant, which, as you know, don't grow on trees and you don't get them for free. So Clarisse is a very sort of exciting person to have on our Open Lab seminar. She's a professor of contemporary history of theater, or history of contemporary theater and digital humanities at Rennes 2, which is a university in France, and which is particularly also cool because we do not have French representation in our group. So we're always super happy to throw tentacles to France by having guests and collaborators. So, Clarisse, the stage is yours. Please share your slides and take us along. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and I will see if it works. Is it okay?
Yes, excellent.
Okay. So, I wanted to go back about the building of tools for performing arts analytics, and I will conclude my talk about a very first attempt to define performing arts analytics. And many aspects of this talk are anchored in my last book, which was published 2 years ago, and which is about performing arts and digital humanities. I just have to change something. Okay, yes. So, as a historian of contemporary performing arts, I'm always confronted with multimodal documents, be they text, for example here, or photographs, or video recordings, programs, not to mention web archives, which are becoming more and more important. Also digitized documents made available by special collections, for example, here, the National Library in France. And so all the documents that you have just seen are a selection from 20,000 digital traces of one creative process, which is a performance entitled Rewalden, staged by Jean-François Perret for the Avignon Festival in 2013. So how to write the history and analyze the works of an ephemeral art form from digital traces, which are fragile because of digital obsolescence, heterogeneous. We have text, images, videos, programs, and so on, and also numerous. Digital traces concerns not only historiography, but also the preservation of the works. A creative cycle, for example, from the very first ideas to the premiere, has an average duration of 4 years, so the same length as a technological cycle. Otherwise, at the time of the premiere, it is already necessary for the people working in performance to update the control software solutions and operating systems of the computers accompanying the tour to save and sort the hundreds, sometimes thousands of documents related to the work in a new version. So right from the start, the artistic and technical team is confronted with problems of technological obsolescence and the quantity of information that can have a decisive impact on the appearance of the work. And what we have also to say is that the artists are the first conservators of their works. So not only are we faced with ephemeral works, but also with traces of works that are increasingly fragile. For a large part of them, in a few years, especially those coming from proprietary software, Word, for example, we will probably no longer be able to open them and therefore to read all these documents. So what happened to the traces? Becoming digital, the traces have undergone a treatment. They have been fragmented, reduced to units of information, the data, to become manipulable. Digitizing a trace means discretization making it suitable for calculation and manipulation. That is a fundamental distinction between the analogical and the digital trace. And this specificity makes the question of reading the traces and their authenticity complex, because they have to be decoded while opening to manipulation. So this opens to a dynamic conception of the trace through its redocumentarization and its instrumentation. If we take an example, in many digital humanities projects, we use text analysis. So for example, here we have a playbill of a performance created by Merce Cunningham, one of the main choreographers of the 20th century. And from these kind of documents, we can extract the names, the roles of the people who contributed to each performance, and then proceed with network analysis and visualization. I won't explain all this project, but in the case of Merce Cunningham, it was revealing two very different ways of collaborations before and after the creation of its company. What I would like to focus on are the different steps of this analysis that, well, I guess that a lot of you are working like this, but I want then to go back to more general considerations about art history and data science. So it all starts with the empirical world, in our case, a performance. And here you can see, for example, Biped by Merce Cunningham. The first step is to collect the traces of this performance. Here's the program of the premiere, which has been digitized. And today, the program would probably be born digital. From that, you can carry out an analysis. We go from trace to data. It's a process of breaking down traces into discrete units to extract data. So they are extracted, selected, chosen by the researcher, and data is what we give to ourselves as opposed to the trace, what we are given. So this is an analysis step in the sense of a decomposition and fragmentation. Data have to be brought together to be interpreted, and visualization is today the method that makes it possible to offer this synthesis. So this visualization is consistent with the data. It denotes the data and the instrumentation, for example, here, the use of GEFI. And the last step is to connote the meta trace or interpret it. The importance of connotation and thus the possibility of multiple interpretations of an opening of meaning reintroduces a nice thesis where some would only wish for a metathesis. So another important point to stress is that the process must be reversible. It must be possible to go back to the source, hence the importance of documenting the steps and publishing the data. So we can summarize this process with this figure. So the meta trace process is a hermeneutic loop to be established between analysis and synthesis methods and interpretation. It shows the extent to which historiography in a digital context requires going through the process of doing. It is first of all a practice before it is a discourse. So it is fundamental in this context, on the one hand, to document all the stages that led from the work and its creation process to the trace, from the trace to the data, from the data to the meta trace. On the other hand, to understand what the implications of each stage of this chain are in terms of data interpretation and trace reduction. This is in order to be able to trace the source, to identify the different manipulations and instruments that led to such and such visualization, to such and such an interpretation. In other words, each step in the process of creating the meta trace leads to an interpretation that must be documented as such. In this process, different kinds of challenges appear. The first one is that one of the main risks is to lose the overview of the trace and the context from which the data was extracted. In most cases, building up datasets from historical sources is an inherent part of the research. So data is intimately linked to its context. And yet, the tools we use very often consist of separating and extracting data from sources, then exploiting them in different workflows. As a result, it becomes impossible to link the final visualization to its source. In other words, how to combine close reading with distant reading in the same interface, back and forth. So this is the very first challenge. The second one is that data science involves data visualization and hence structure and synthesis. So it tends to make phenomena that are not stable seem stable, to borrow Latour's criticism of Durkheim and his development of actor network theory. How can we reintroduce narration and progression into the data? How can we reconcile event and structure? So historiography in a digital context is not a reappraisal of quantitative history in the strict sense of the term. It calls first of all for practices, and it is also in this practice that the narrative is housed. It is because it is a question of practice and not just of exposing traces, but rather of exposing them to manipulation, that a paradigm shift is taking place, inviting us to make history differently. The third challenge is that our sources, especially in performing arts, are multimodal. So we may have text, images, sounds, videos, programs, and so on. So most of our data science tools are either for text, either for images. So we have kind of silo approaches. We are at the very beginning of multimodal data science tools and of the multimodal turn in DH research, to quote Melvin Ware's and Thomas Smith's recent paper. To me, this is a crucial turning point in order to study the artistic creation process. For example, how an idea emerged from an image and then was developed into a text or light design. And the fourth challenge is that we still do need a notation. A notation is description. It relates to a pre-existing document. We comment on what exists. In the performing arts, it is impossible to annotate the performance itself because one can only annotate the notation of the performance or any trace relating to a given work. We don't have the work anymore. So the same applies to video recording. We annotate a film, but not the performance. There must always be a medium that allows for annotation. Annotation is essential. No notation system, especially in the performing arts, can be self-sufficient. It must be completed, specified, either with notes, the marginalia, or with other documents that specify certain elements of the score. For example, photographs, diagrams, or drawings. I just will give you an example that I've taken from Lucinda Childs. And also for dance researchers, Scott DeLaunta, Kim Dix, and Sarah Watley, who coordinated a special issue of performance research entitled On Annotations. So I quote, "There are no strict distinctions between annotation and notation as mark making when marking is an extension of thinking, not merely a recording." End of quote. So an example of this approach, where notation and annotation are closely intertwined, is the digital publication, A Steady Pulse, for the revival of Lucinda Childs' Dances in Silence. So what you have is a split screen, which allows simultaneous visualization of the video recording of Melody Excerpt, a work of 77, reenacted in 2013, and it's an animated graphic score. So animation is both a notation of the choreography and an annotation of its video recording. Another example is that digital technologies offer new opportunities for annotation practices for documentation and preservation of works. And here you have an example of graphic annotations on the recording of a performance by William Forsythe, and which was so for this choreography, so it was one flat scene reproduced, and then a whole work with a computer scientist in order to create all these annotations in order to understand what is the choreographic for William Forsythe. So what is the nature of the choreographic act as such? So to me, the main question remains how to transform a performance into data. I do think this is still the most difficult thing. In the context of a larger project about preservation of time-based media art, I started to think about a way to document collective creative processes from digital traces. So for one performance, I may have 20 people working all together, generating 20,000 documents or more. And one of my research questions was how to identify the emergence of an idea, traveling from a document to another one, from one people, for example, the set designer, to another people, for example, the director. And this led me to a first prototype, which is Recall. So this prototype is really a culture analytics approach. So the goal was to combine close reading and distant reading. And so what you see here is that you have all the documents coming from the hard drives of the people involved in Jean-François Perret work, Rewalden. And we extract all the metadata from these documents, which gives you some data visualization analytics. And one dot is one document, so it's possible to go from the data to the context of this data and to the original document to open it in your computer if you have the software to do that. And from that, for example, it's possible to see who worked when, or what were the objects they are working on, and so on. So different kinds of information, and going from distant reading to close reading back and forth. So Recall had two main objectives. The first one was to assist artists in documenting their work in order to ensure its recovery and overcome the obsolescence of digital technologies. And the other objectives was to help researchers study the creative processes in the context of born digital heritage and big data. And to me, a very important point is linking the data to the source from which it is extracted, combining close reading and distant reading in the same interface. So this was a very first step. I started this project years ago, in 2007, if I remember well. And this prototype was 2013 around. But Recall didn't answer to another important trace for performing arts, which is video recordings. Since the 60s, one of the answers to document contemporary performing arts is video recording. I guess most of you know some performances only by their video recording. So it's really a key document for performing arts, one of the most important traces, but it's also a very difficult document to deal with. So I guess here there are many things which are very difficult to perceive. For example, where are the spectators? Is the interaction real time or no? How does it work? So you don't have all this information in this video recording. So to explain this video, what if we could link it to other documents? In order to explain the creative process, to analyze the scenography or the dramaturgy. What if we could also add websites, for example, to link to the company websites, to blogs, to articles, and then be able to analyze the reception of the piece. What if we could also add text annotations, for example, in order to comment what we are seeing? Or even visual annotations. For example, here to point, where are the beamers projecting the moving images on this immersive stage design? Then it would be possible to make the implicit explicit, to explain what we are seeing, to analyze performances from its visual traces. It would open up new perspectives for research, but also for teaching and for publication. So these are the questions which prompted Memoricall, thanks to the support of the French Ministry of Culture. So Memoricall is a free and open source web app to explain and annotate a video recording. The videos are enhanced, adding notes, documents, or web links. And the result is called a capsule. So here you can see that it's then possible to explain the context, to add more information, for example, about the creative process, to give a very precise reference, etc. So it's very important not only to collect the different documents about the performance, so what we did before, for example, with the zip file, but it's also important to establish connections in between the documents. So Memoricall is a tool to connect the dots. So you can consider it as an open source web app to explain and annotate a video, but it can also be considered as a writing and publishing tool. So I won't go into details, but it can be used in many contexts with artists, cultural institutions, researchers, students, critics, and so on, and so far beyond only performing arts studies. So nonetheless, these two first solutions or prototypes needed many improvements. With Memoricall, we did the last version in 2021, more or less, and with a release in 2023. But Recall and Memoricall are not interoperable. They are only concerned with metadata of the different documents. Recall is standalone, etc. Moreover, it is essential to be able to navigate between micro and micro, between close reading and distant reading, between diachronic and synchronic representations, and in other words, being able to represent a process without erasing its complexity. So, thanks to a European project about collaboration and citizen science, I started with a team to redesign Recall and Memoricall. The main challenge was the documentation of a collaboration between a researcher and a scientist. And so the first question was, is Memoricall suitable to document this collaboration? This is not very new to me because I worked since many years on artist and scientist collaboration as a researcher, and years ago as a theater deputy director in Belgium. So I worked a lot on this issue about artist and scientist collaborations. I also tried to model these collaborations defining indicators. It was quite empirical and not as systematic as, for example, Dominique Boulier's approach, but they are very first attempt. So the first idea was using Memoricall to document different steps of this collaboration. So we created some capsules attaching text, protocols, all kinds of traces. But a document was doing a lot of resistance. We are not very satisfied with this approach because the collaboration between the dancer and the philosopher was also documented by Irénée Blin with movements notation. She was using a Laban notation system. And so she created this kind of scores that show how the same movement, for example, to sit down, can be noted in a general way, but also in a very precise way in order to show the variations. So this led to several questions. I skip all the points about technical and the UI UX design improvements, but I will try to resume these questions. The first one was how to foster collaboration and create fair capsules. So as I already mentioned, memory code is not interoperable with other standards, one of the most important being WWII. So we decided to move to WWII standard. It's a very important change because WWII is well known for still images, but it is now also becoming a standard for video recordings. So what we are doing right now is to develop a plugin in order to do also video annotation inside WWII. Second question is a video recording the main document? The answer is no. The video recording is not always the most important document because it could be a score or a handbook or a series of photographs. So now we would like to consider memory call as a network of documents. So it means that memory call could offer different viewpoints on a corpora. Sometimes the video is first and the documents attached to it explicit the video. Sometimes the score or the text is first and the video attached or other documents explicit the score. So then the reader can change its viewpoint, for example, from the video as the main document to the score as the main document. And memory call, this new version, will allow to vary the views inside a corpora of digital traces. And the third main question was how to extract data, so mainly automatic annotations. Because, for example, when we have to study dozens of video recording, we would like to facilitate the task and not go with manual annotations, which is time-consuming, subject to errors, and which can vary from one research or one intern to another one. So this is now something that we use more and more in digital humanities, which is to add artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. So it would be possible to detect who is present in the image, at what place, if there is a lot of movement or light changes, etc. So this is still a roadmap, but we can count on the recent advances of computer vision and also on experiments by other research teams. So from that, we decided to start from scratch with a new tool. So the name of this tool is Harvest. It was called before Scene, but we decided to change because of many considerations. So the new name is Harvest, which means source in Brittany. So I will give you some insight about these tools that we are working on right now. And so we are working on and off for about a year. We released our prototype in May 2023 and development began again last November. So the point of departure is WWII, which was initially conceived of as a set of standards to allow for interoperable sharing and referencing and annotation of digital images. So we use it as a framework at the base of an environment for multimodal document network analysis. And we use also the Mirador viewer, which is one of the major WWII viewers, developed principally by our colleagues at Stanford and Leipzig, and which is typically the viewer of choice for researchers. So Mirador already supports images. However, video and audio are not supported. So the first step for multimodal annotation was to support video and audio documents. So Harvest contributes this functionality to the WWII community. And we have created a branch of Mirador that supports full audio and video playback. And we are working with the Mirador development team to integrate this functionality as part of the main version of the viewer, because they updated Mirador to React. It was a new version of React. So we are now working on this updating and to be able to be in the new environment. The second important step is for close reading of documents. We often need to annotate them. So in Harvest, documents of any kind can be annotated in a number of ways, with textual annotations, visual overlays, time-based annotations for audio and video documents. And every document and every annotation can also be given metadata by default following the Dublin Core ontology. So annotations are not only for close reading. If we consider workflows with semantic data extraction of documents, then it's also possible to extract automatic annotations from the documents, for example, with NLP or computer vision. And right now, this is something that has to be done outside of Harvest, but we are working on integrating curated artificial intelligence and machine learning driven workflows, as well as a middle ground compromise in the form of an open RESTful API. So one useful functionality for this is the ability for annotations to be linked to another document, which allows the user to create and navigate networks of multimodal documents. These networks can be explored fluidly, allowing for seamless shifts in perspective between close and distant reading approaches. This functionality also ensures that artifacts, such as computationally driven visualizations of document collections, can be decomposed and lead back to the various original sources. So here you can see the prototype. It's open source, free to use web app. Anyone with an email address will be able to create an account and start adding, annotating, and engaging with content. So this is also a notable contribution to the WWII community, which can sometimes suffer from a significant technical barrier that must be overcome in order to start using WWII-driven content and approaches. So in Harvest, it will offer a multimodal environment where users can account for all of their documents. It will also offer the possibility to publish in the same environment documents, data, its analysis, and the narrative. And as of September 2024, the beta version will be freely available as a flexible and open tool to engage with digital collections. So this is a short demo of the prototype. The new version is quite different. It's already quite different, but it will give you a glimpse at what we are doing. So the first thing was to make the most of Mirador as an interactive video player, so notably with annotations that control the playback of the main media resource. So basically said it was to be able what we were doing in memory call inside Mirador. So this was the very first step. So you see that it's kind of the same system. You can link documents and so on. But what we have done, it's also to make the most of annotations that draw in lighting shapes directly on the Mirador window. And if you may retain the video-centric perspective of memory call, we propose an approach that can consider one video as one point of entry into a hierarchical network of documents amongst many others. So what we are doing is really being able to navigate a network of documents in a cumulative, non-destructive manner, with documents opening and being viewed simultaneously. So what we have done is to also to create a very different kind of visualizations, from traditional network graphs to bespoke interfaces that pertain to a specific research project, like the compass mapping that we have just see here. So one goal in development will be to make these tools available to users that don't have a technical background, which is also very important to me, which is literacy for researchers. So it has also to be used by beginners in digital humanities. So I've shown you 3 prototypes, so you could think why persisting in building interfaces for so many long time, because it's almost 20 years of building tools. To me, it's because all these tools are object laboratories. Interfaces are the conditions of hermeneutics. This is why it is so important, at least in this current period of digital humanities, where we are not yet fully aware of the hermeneutic and epistemological significance of the digital instrumentarium, that researchers become involved in writing interfaces and research tools. So, sorry for that. So Harvest is part of a larger project where all of these uses will be addressed. It has been funded by an ERC grant, which has started this last January. So I don't have many outputs of this starting program yet. So the name of this project is Stage. It's too early to say much about it, but to conclude, I just will say a few words. So the Stage project is about the digital traces of performing arts and their crucial role in writing the history of contemporary performing arts, the new methods we need to make them talk, and the new knowledge we can build from them. So Stage has 3 interconnected objectives. The first one is using data from the programs to create a graph showing the interactions of people and creation context. For example, how does Jean-François Perez's network evolve over time? The second objective is to reveal visual resurgences and quotations from thousands of photographs and video analysis. How can we track the reminiscence, for example, of Bob Wilson or Mas Cunningham works from one performance to another one? And the third objective is to model creative processes, taking into account not only the rehearsals, but also all the data produced by all the team members. So contemporary history of mise en scène has so far been focused on the study of one performance, one director, that is to say, close reading of the canon. If we take the first objective of Stage, we will move to distant reading and create a network with all the works created at the Avignon Festival and then aggregate other corpora. So just to say a few words about the Avignon Festival, it's 2,000 performances. The dream is to build and study the giant graph of contemporary performing arts. But what will it tell about performing arts? So the Stage project is about the digital traces of performing arts and their crucial role in writing the history of contemporary performing arts, the new methods. So I already mentioned that. But in this context of writing theater history and analyzing the works from its digital traces is what I call performing arts analytics. So performing arts analytics explores the paradigm shift of digital traces in theater and performing arts studies, arguing that the digital turn has already a dramatic impact on the memory of contemporary theater by renewing source criticism, methodological thinking, and narratives, moving beyond traditional methods of close reading to computational assisted reading. So I will stop here just to mention that what I presented is a team and network project. I'm working with computer developers, designers, artists, researchers, and cultural institutions. And I have to thank them. And thank you also for your attention. And so, if you have any question.
Thank you very much. So yeah, very, very cool. I think your last slide sort of is a good entry into the discussion, perhaps. We talk about digital humanities in English. Well, the performing arts are certainly not just digital, like even the stuff you've shown. I mean, it's happening in, you could say, meat space, right? So there's a lot of analog stuff going on. And France is a really curious, interesting, different way of framing digital humanities, because you're literally based in humanité numérique, which is sort of like the number-based humanities, which is a completely different ballgame because numbers can totally be continuous, while digital requires figures or zeros and ones, which are discrete. So what is your stance regarding that? Like, do you think the digital really is a different domain, or is it an extension of what we had before, basically?
Well, it's complicated question. To me, we cannot escape the digital in our disciplines. So it's really an extension, and it's also a new way. It's also new methods, but it's most of all new questions in our disciplines. So to me, the main interest in digital humanities is that we can ask new research questions that were not possible before. So it's really so the digital and the humanities are linked in this aspect. So you cannot say that you have the humanities and then that you have the digital. And it's also because of this intertwined approach that I need to, yes, to build these object laboratories, all these prototypes, in order to really understand what the digital does to my object studies. And also in terms of literacy, of course, I'm not a developer, but I need to have some digital skills in order to understand what is going on there. So it's also a transformation of teaching and of the skills that you need to develop to do your research as a humanist researcher.
Mila
I don't know
Oiva
if
has a
it's
question.
Yeah. Thank you for this super interesting presentation. I'm just really thrilled. Actually, you partially already responded, but I still wanted to ask you, because this is an kind of like you show this kind of like amazing path of building these different tools and kind of like developing new things based on the older tools that you have been doing. And of course, we all know that it requires very much time, and you already said that it has been an important path for you to create these object laboratories and to, in order to yourself to understand what can be done with these tools and what can be done with the digital traces. But could you tell a little bit more, kind of like, how has this this process of developing and redeveloping these tools affected your kind of like thinking and especially like the critical thinking of what are performing arts? How can we actually study them? And kind of, I would be really interested in kind of like learning more about this process of yours. Thanks.
So right now, if you want to study the creative processes of performing arts, the main way to do that is to sit down in the theater and to observe the rehearsals. So this is the way we study creative processes and we do creative processes analysis. And it may means that it's only, let's say, 2 months of the creative process. And the creative process begins years ago before entering a theater, before entering a stage. And it can also, yes, so the stage is not the only place for the creative process. So taking into account the traces, so the digital traces and traces that we can digitize for the creative processes, for example, the emails between the scenographer and the director, or sketches, or book references, or images, or whatever, then it's possible to have a very different view about collaborations, for example, between artists and technicians. And so it's also a revaluation of the way people are working in theater companies. And it's, so this approach is really changing the way we approach creative processes and the way we study collaborations inside the companies. So it's concrete example.
Thank you very much. Mark Hannett. You're muted.
Now? Can
Yes.
you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you for the inspired talk. I have some comments about what you were saying before. Maybe I had collaborated with several years doing theater performances with Roger Bernard. Maybe you know him.
Yes, I know.
I did for like few years. I did basically almost all the performance together, like software that runs the whole performance and something like this. And yeah, what you were commenting, yeah, it's true. It's actually very much, if you want to document the process of, if I comment about the process of making, maybe Roger Bernat is extreme. He changed, I can tell you, he changed all the time the ideas. Luckily he also listens. I was doing this, I don't know, maybe you try, I don't know if you tried, because it was in France, it was in Belgium, it was in several places. One performance of Roger that the theater become a parliament, and you have to vote for like you're a parliament representative. We actually launched it in the National Theatre of Spain. I don't remember the year, but imagine, like, was the first theater performance in the National Theatre run 100% by a software. That was like, the director of the National Theatre of Spain was coming to all the rehearsals, because every day we had several blue screens on the windows, because the kind of speed of changes that Roger was putting to me was impossible to not make bugs on the software, and the software ran in C++ because it needed to do very much a lot of things, not in JavaScript or something, and means any error will lead into basically Windows error, especially if I point the pointer to certain place that I make a big memory leak or anything. Just to explain that actually the processes are very, very diverse, and I'm like this, for example, this particular piece, I had to stop him 24 hours before the opening of changes and said, look, I need to stop now, and tomorrow I will have it fixed, and it worked. And also a lot of things that happen in the performance are just my ideas pitching to him, and luckily he accepted many. Of course he put me many also. This is the documenting of things is very complex. If you will come to the stages rehearsals, you will just get one part actually, because most of the things were done in the night in the bar with my laptop open and fixing things, and in the night myself sleeping very little, kind of fixing the things that we talk in the bar and something like that. Means this is how things work in this. But I had a question about the tools, because we only have one tool that we developed in Kudan, and we can send you a link later. Maybe it's interesting you look. But the thing is that how you do, for example, with the versionings, like and also to academic capitalize a little bit on the tools. I think that the tool making is kind of very challenging in academia. Like we make one paper for this tool. If I keep developing, I dedicate. I mean, as a kind of someone who's building the career also in academia, because I mean, I didn't explain you. I mean, I'm a professional artist. I had been living from art for many years, and I decided 4 years ago to start the PhD, and I'm trying to finish this year. And the thing is that to make a tools, I feel that it's a little bit challenging, because you dedicate a lot of time, but you need to also be able to kind of publish and then when you do updates, what you make new tool, or you just put version 2 and then make a new paper. I mean, I think you have so much experience. Maybe you can just give some opinion how you your
Right,
experience
it's
tell you.
something very, very complicated. I make the distinction between prototypes. So a prototype is something that I will make a paper about it. It will work more or less. It will have some bugs and so on, but I'm not supposed to do the maintenance. And so it's more to try some concepts and to see if it can work. So
Okay.
this is one category. And then web apps, which has to be used by a lot of people. For example, memory call is used by school children from 12 years old, and it has thousands of users, and so we have to provide a service. It cannot crash. You have to guarantee the sustainability of the data and so on. So it's not that simple. I still do think that we have to think about business development of digital humanities tools, which is something that we have to think about collectively as scholars, because we all know a lot of digital humanities wonderful projects which have died with their inventors. So it's really about sustainability and how can we go to business models with what we are doing in digital humanities. And to me, one of the best example of that is Zotero, which is open source, which is a success, which is used worldwide, and which is mandated. And so I think that there is a lot to think about there. And in my case, also in the French context, we have national infrastructure, which is Humanum, and which provides, for example, the servers and sustainability of the solutions and so on. So it's possible also to rely on Humanum. So for example, memory call is on the server of Humanum and all the data is there. So I don't have to think about how to make it sustainable and so on, because Humanum is taking care of this kind of aspects.
Okay. This is like a national infrastructure that you can use as a researcher. I understand, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
I so far I at least in Estonia I didn't I don't know that there is these things. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
But it's something that they would like to maybe to build as a European level.
And you mean that maybe they will open to European projects?
No, not exactly. Well, I'm not sure about what I'm saying, but that there is an idea, for example, in the context of Daria and EOSC, to build an equivalent of Humanum at the European level.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
But maybe, Max, you know more about that.
Thank you very much. Andres Karius has a question.
Yeah. Am I audible if I...
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I had a few questions. So I'm going to start with the one that actually this discussion was also about. So the creation of these tools and their benefits. So in your talk, you mentioned that you create them to sort of facilitate the people who so humanists who don't have the skills, so they can use these tools, and then they can also look into these large data sets of performance, or right. So these tools are for people who don't have the skills to use other tools. So have you actually done like analysis of that? I was wondering, like some sort of cost benefit analysis, if you will. Like which one is actually cheaper? Is it cheaper and more beneficial to create these tools, which of course look very elegant, but are ultimately limited to the few buttons that are available there, or to teach humanities people just a little bit of programming so they need tools like that? Like, has anybody actually done like a cost benefit analysis of that?
Well, I would love to teach digital literacy to all the humanists, but I'm not sure they want me to do that. The point is that to me, it's really important to have this digital literacy. I don't know what is the situation in your country, but here in France, I have the impression that my generation is kind of autodidact digital humanist, and that we are very, very fragile, because we thought that digital humanities would be in every curriculum in humanities and so on, and it's not. I can tell you about performing arts studies. I think maybe we are maybe 2-3 people doing an introduction to digital humanities and in all the digital performing arts curriculum in France. So we have a lot of work to do there. And one part of this work to convince our colleagues and to convince the students is first to produce research, and second, to provide very easy to use tools, even if they don't do what we could do with Python or whatever. So we still do need some interfaces in order to make them autonomous, and to have this very first step to manipulate the documents, to extract the data from it, and so on. So to me, it's still a very important challenge if we want to convince them that digital humanities are so important for our disciplines.
Okay. So it's kind of like a balancing act of trying to make people do this stuff even if they have the skills.
I think we should probably mention that we're not talking about tools or applications versus code. We're talking about missing protocols, really, right? So WWII emerged because the W3C literally forgot to have an annotation tag in image and canvas elements. And so therefore, in order to annotate images as opposed to text, which was doable with HTML or TAI extensions, actually the community, which unsurprisingly was the scholarly community, had to come up with something, which was then IIIF, which then obviously leads to the fact most of our scholar colleagues cannot sort of use plain code, and we're not talking Python or R, we're talking deeper down. So basically we needed the tools to sort of exemplify this, and this is how Mirador came to be. And so now you're building sort of a tool for another subgroup, that's people who also want to sort of like annotate video and audio. But now there's a really interesting question, which is boiling down to this thing that in humanities, we're prone to define terms, to come up with sort of disciplinary ways how to do things. And, we have literally data standards since 30 years. We have procedure standards. I have been myself an ERC panelist. I can totally testify for the fact that it's actually a conformity process. So it's to get in means you're conform enough with the expectation of 12 colleagues who are, like us, not computer scientists, but in our case, sort of humanities people. But then this begs the question, how about all the other things that are not possible that are actually rolling out in the world? So there is right now the situation, like, for example, the tools you have shown to us, they're awesome from a digital humanities perspective, but they have clearly a resolution limit. Like Maria Palazzi at OSO, Ohio State University, heads ACAD, which is sort of the mother organization of the Arts and Technology school I worked in at UT Dallas. So we were a spin-off of that, like with many people from Ohio State. And I remember visiting there at a pretty extensive interview. And the first thing Maria showed me was a tool to record a dancer in like sort of a motion capture suit that had hundreds of fixed points on the suit. And basically by just doing a pirouette and like make a weird movement, you would create an unbelievable amount of data, which you can actually sort of analyze in a really interesting way. And what you're presenting very clearly does not incorporate that, because a simple movement of 5 people over 5 seconds would exceed all the data that you have, because it's way more than the video data and so on. So, and this is not a critique of your tool. What I'm saying here is there is basically a lot of data that can be recorded in a performance process, which is not covered by these kind of tools, but these kind of tools sort of cover a very particular way of annotation, which is hard won. Like somebody watches this. If a humanist does it by hand, a lot of computation happens in the head. That's bespoke computation, which is really hard to sort of mimic with machine learning. Of course, you can find similar images and you can do sentiment analysis and whatever, but you cannot feel like the dancer, which a good humanist who studies dance can totally do. They can actually spot what a figure skater is doing in much more detail than sort of a machine learning system could do it without really precise training, including the improvisation part. So my question is, like, how do you position yourself in this middle ground of where on the one hand you have good old art critique and theater critique, and on the other hand you have these sort of like really massively data producing motion capture kind of things that obviously have lots of annotation in the background. Like every animation movie is basically as you say, a capsule. Like if you watch Avatar, there's a capsule behind it that has all the information that pans out on the screen. So in this middle ground, how do you position yourself? And is there a limit where you say, okay, that's really not what I want to do. I don't want to serve James Cameron and basically do his whole movie documentation.
I think it's really depending on your research questions, because it could move you from one side or another one. Second thing is that talking about mocap, for example, now with computer vision, it's really exciting right now because we have very important results. And so we do not need so much mocap to analyze the video recordings. So it's moving fast. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's also a little bit about what goes first? Is it data-driven analysis, or is it hypothesis-driven analysis? In a way, your question. And
can you repeat? Sorry.
It's also kind of an opposition between data analysis and hypothesis-driven analysis. And I won't oppose data-driven and hypothesis-driven analysis. I think that they are complementary, that we do need both of them, but it's not at the same moment of the research. So sometimes at a certain point of your research, you would have to go back to a hypothesis-driven research question. And at some point, you would need to have to get a data-driven approach. So it's really going back and forth, and depending on what you want to analyze. And for example, one of the things that I would like to analyze from the photographs and video recordings of the Avignon Festival, just to give you a very concrete example, I will have the 400,000 images of the photograph of the Avignon Festival from the 20 last years. So it's 20,000 photographs each year. And so from that, it's something that you couldn't do before. It's if there is a way to analyze the reminiscence of a performance to another. Before, what you would do is to read all the intentions by the directors saying, I'm influenced by Cantor, Wilson, or whatever, just name dropping. And you can, yes, you can trust these declarations or not. But now we can really change this focus and saying, okay, when you are going to the cours d'honneur, which is a very, very impressive stage in the Avignon Festival, can you track the memory of all the previous performances that were performed here in this very place? And if you have these kind of questions, you cannot go back with only looking at the photographs one by one, because you may have like 100 and thousands of photographs. So it's not possible to do that by hand with traditional methods. So if you want to answer to these kind of questions, then you have to go back to code and to machine learning and to work with computer scientists. There is no other way to answer that. So you have the choice. You can escape the questions, so looking for another one, which won't require computing or developing or software analysis. But if you really want to answer these kind of questions, then you have to, yes, to go to computing. Mm-hmm. Because right now, this is the only solution to answer.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to go back to your polarity of data-driven versus hypothesis-driven research, right? Like if you ask, if Merce Cunningham was still alive and you would ask him, he probably would say, you know, it's like every dance move obviously requires training. And so you have a certain kind of anticipation. He was very well known for improvising a lot. So your anticipation may fail, like your body does something, but something else happens. And there's very clearly data, like your Bayesian expectation, and there's a hypothesis of what happens if you make a certain move. And if you do it and it's different, you need to sort of like also have learned that there's some other data in your head to actually react. And now why do I bring this in? There's very clearly a conjunction, like hypothesis and data, and data can both come from outside perception and also expectation from the brain, is going on concurrently. And Merce was actually using software to actually plan his sort of like impossible seeming moves, which he found sort of his troop of people who were fearless enough to actually do them. And so that is a sort of rather interesting thing, that we're now sort of like, as humanists, really slowly learning sort of the tools which those who we analyze were pioneering, co-pioneering, right? I mean, we're really sort of at the root of computer graphics there. And they were doing things that awfully look a lot like the things you can, you now buy in a box if you get some kind of NVIDIA small gadget to do pose recognition and stuff like that. There's literally the same software, sort of, than what he did in the 90s. And so that is a sort of like really interesting thing, like we're discussing in the humanities. You still have to decide, like, oh, I do data-driven research, or like a reviewer would say, this is just data-driven. The person has no question. Or they say it's just hypothesis-driven. There is no corpus, right? These are two death arguments for a lot of research proposals. While the people who we analyze, like Merce Cunningham, were super well known for, is like, if I have no idea, I just go to the living room and dance some more. Ideas will come, hypotheses will come. And so the question is that something we can actually achieve in terms of performance? Can we actually sort of reach that kind of level of freedom while at the same time rigor, without getting caught in these standards? And so as you are developing these kind of tools, which at the same time try to sort of like fulfill a standard and create a standard, while at the same time they're super non-standard because they're new. So they're by definition not a standard. So that is sort of like, I think it's really exciting to sort of embark in this process. So my question is like, how do you balance this idea of, freedom of like, I need something new because it doesn't exist yet, and I will come up with it, which has a lot of freedom in there, while at the same time you want to have the rigor is like, okay, this actually needs to sort of like conform to either hypothesis or data driven, and like how do you negotiate that?
Well, it's really a step by step process. To me, the first step was when I worked on the 9 Evenings project, which was we built a publication interface to analyze all the diagrams of 9 Evenings. So it was really a tailored development. And then I've seen the project by the different projects by William Forsythe and so on. And so there were many projects with a lot of money and skills and people involved for one performance. And so one of my preoccupations was how to build a tool for many performances and not for one performance.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it was really important to be able to develop tools that we could use on as many performances we could. That was, to me, the first line of development. It's not to develop for one performance and then to another one and then to maintain the tools and so on. It was really clear to me at the very beginning of the development. And the second thing is that when I started, there was no such standards that we have now. Interoperability, we didn't speak about interoperability in the 2000s. So and it became something very important. So it's really a negotiation between what you need and the general context. So, for example, the new version of memorical and recall is really driven by the necessity of being interoperable. Because memorical was working. So Yeah, it was okay. Recall was a prototype which was more or less working, more than less. So we could only just update it and saying we don't need to be interoperable and so on. But right now, I don't think it's possible to think like that, because then it's also about the research community, the users you have, and the good practices that you can share. So if you develop tools, you are also responsible for some digital humanities values that you transmit developing these kind of tools. And so you have also this kind of responsibilities. So you have to, well, in my sense, you have to share and to practice, to put in practice all these good practices and requirements for the field. Not sure I'm answering your question, but
very interesting. Thank you very much. Mila Oiva.
I think Andres had a second question, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you had your hand up for a while, so just go first.
Okay, yeah, just kind of like maybe as a brief comment and then a question. I think that at least how I see these kind of like humanities scholars or scholars in general developing tools. So it's not only about kind of like coming up with certain tools and that you could actually easily replace them often with the particular codes necessarily, but how I see it it's that there is usually necessity to also kind of like think about more broadly how do we actually model culture, what are the things that we count there, or how do we detect these particular elements of culture. So how I see this kind of like tool development often within humanities and digital humanities is that there is this kind of like more conceptual part also involving. So, but actually this leads to my question, which could be a little bit unfair, because you said that kind of like that you have just recently started your project, this new project. So and you haven't had really time to really do yet, so you don't have any results yet. But I'm really curious about this, that you said that you are aiming to model creative processes, which is super interesting, and I think it's kind of like it is, I understand its value for performing arts, but I think that it's something that interests more widely also kind of like research processes and other types of creative processes that could be. So I'm just kind of like asking, could you somehow speak a little bit more about how are you planning to model these creative processes? Do you have some kind of like certain components of creative process, or how do you actually trace creative process in data? So I'm super curious to learn more about this.
Okay, so maybe I will just answer in 2 steps. First steps to answer also to Max is that one of my preoccupation was also not to erase complexity, because there are very, very complex phenomena inside collaborations and with many different kind of traces and so on. And so I try to build tools which don't erase the complexity of the phenomena. So this is also something really important to me. So then how to study creative processes and to model them. The way we plan to do that, it's to start with study cases. So I already did some study cases, building the tools. So it's also something that I didn't mention. Maybe it's really a hand-in-hand process between study cases and the development of a tool. And with also different kind of co-design workshops and with artists or researchers using the tool, observing them, how they use it, and then developing new functionalities from these uses, which are not only mine. And so it's also something that I do on really on a daily basis. And yes, so study cases. So we plan to study 15 performances in this project, 7 or 8 which are already created performances. So we will collect the hard drives of all the people as much as we can. So this is one of my bad habits. It's to go to the control booth and to copy the hard drives. And so, and then from that, trying to see what we have inside and how we can analyze these hard drives, which are messy and with a lot of things. So, so we will do that for 7 or 8 performances, and then we will choose during the next 4 years 8 performances that will be created for the Avignon Festival, and we will put some softwares on the machines of the people involved in the performances. So for example, one of the things that Recall does is to watch what you are doing on your computer. So at the same time, it saves what is your environment, what plugins you use, so all the software you use during the creation process and so on. And so these are very, very important informations when you want to preserve the works, because then you know what is the operating system, what are the different versions of the software and so on. So it was also dealing a lot with how to preserve a work. And so it doesn't watch everything that you are doing on your computer, but only the folder when you say that here you can watch what you are doing in this part of your computer. So this is the way we would like to work. So we have to select the 8 companies that we will work with us during the following years, and to see how much we can track all this information from the beginning of the process until the premiere. And we will also, of course, attend to the rehearsals of the performance and to see what is the gap between what you can observe during the rehearsals and what you can infer from the digital traces that you collect from the beginning to the end of the process. So these are the 2 different ways of using these creative processes. And then from that, we will have, I hope, a lot of data and see if we can model these creation processes. If there is a comparative different, if we can compare these creative processes, if it's different according your country, according the where you are in your career, if it's dance, if it's theater, if there is a lot of technologies or not. So of course you cannot infer a lot of or model a lot of things from only 15 performances, but it will be a first step in this direction. And I hope that if we have, if we can set up methodologies and processes which are, which we can trust, then other researchers would use it, and then we will have sufficient study cases and data in order to compare all these creative processes and trying to model them.
How about the, you know, Eco said text is like a lazy machine where the reader has to infer what's in the gaps. So the question is, whatever you have, however detailed, I don't know, there's a famous blog post by Stephen Wolfram who has done key logging since 1980. So everything he ever wrote, everything he ever did, every time he went to pee, you can actually sort of like basically trace on his computer. And he has done these plots. So now the key question is like, is that really the record, or is there still something missing? So does this method, I mean, I find this extremely compelling. Like, you know, it's like there's a really a lot of information one can get out of this. But one question regarding the gaps, there may be like, how about the stuff that really cannot be traced? And then how about the selection bias that you get by the fact that like some people said yes to this, but you know, like people who run an operation like a corporation, like I don't know, Halston did with fashion, may totally work like this. You could actually have a really decent recording, while there's other people who, I don't know, are drunk in between or drugs, and they do good fashion. It's still good fashion, but it's not as documentable. And so the question is, how is that? Like, how do you like, where's the limit of that? Like, what do we not capture by having the quote unquote full record of people?
Right, it's not possible to have the full record, and I don't have the pretension to collect the full record of a performance. So I never said that I would do that, but I think that we can deeper our knowledge of what a collaboration is. For example, between technical people and artistic people, which is still something which is understudied, for example. And so it's not that you will have after that a recipe for a creation process that you could apply. It's not simple either. It's more about can we understand what is the emergence of an idea in a collective, in a collaborative process. So it's more the kind of question that I would like to address with this kind of methodologies. So it's not about that you will have the whole story second by second of what you have think in your head, and you know, it's not possible to do that. But I did an experiment with a choreographer at the beginning of Recall. I collected different kind of traces from a hard drive, and then I showed her the data visualization of her process. And she was fascinated because she said, okay, now I understand how I'm working.
Okay.
So it's also a way to have a feedback about things that you do very intuitively and that you don't have an explicit. So it's also a lot about how to make the implicit explicit. And for the artist also to have kind of an external tool in order to have this distant reading approach and to say, okay, you know, at the beginning of the process, usually you start with that. And then you do that. And just to have this feedback. So it's also a feedback tool for the companies.
Okay. So that means, that means we're stuck, like so the material feeds back to the people who produce the material, which is great. There is, you said you're interested in sort of how stuff moves. We have plenty of people here who are in some form or another interested on material reuse, cultural evolution, and stuff like that. And like one of the interesting things is we'll always be stuck with the data we have, no matter how much it is, right? And then right now we run into the situation where we can actually trace back things further than we thought. Like, for example, like example I ran into recently, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, came up with a lot of rock and roll moves, which obviously Elvis and Cheryl Lewis spied on her. They took it to wide audiences. They became super famous for these kind of moves. And in fact, you know, she did them before. Not only that, probably she partially at least learned it from people in her church congregation when she was like, because, you know, if you have a 7-year-old kid and you give her a guitar, it's not like that she learns the stuff from, so there were other people too, and we don't know who these women and men were. And so we can trace it further back, but we will still miss sort of a lot of the data. And the question is like, how do we deal in this world where we say, oh, here, there's a data set of this performance group, a data set of this performance group. We can actually see how they refer to each other. Obviously, it's easier to refer to like things that are frequent, like, you know, I don't know, the funky drama sample or the aim and break is easy to spot because we know how it looks like. While things that only occur twice, once known and once not known, we don't. We cannot really trace back into the unknown. And so the question is, how do we sort of like get out of this fact that if we do what we do in the way you do it, and we do it too, how can we get out of the canon that sort of reifies itself from the material we may extend the canon, but we will be stuck with another canon, which in your case will have 9 hard disks of 9 performance groups, which is cool. They will totally be canon because there will be lots of publications. But like, how can we escape this? Like, can we transcend this in some way, where you would say, okay, beyond humanistic analysis, we find some fundamental patterns which we can extrapolate, and they're not specific to this group, and they're not just a feedback to this particular group, but sort of like, you know, like they do in team science, for example. Like we had Nosher Contractor speaking, for example. That is a really interesting comparison. Like they do team science in companies and do exactly what you're doing. Like they analyze cell phone records and all the hard disk, all the email traffic, everything, the whole asset pipeline that goes through the company. But then again, they're stuck in their company. You see what I mean? They're stuck in the corpus of phenomena that are visible, and not all the other ways are visible. Like how do we approach this? Like, can we come up with something like I don't know, something that allows us to escape that kind of trap, basically?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I'm as much interested in similarities than in uniqueness. So often when we talk about big data analysis and so on, it's to find patterns or similarities and so on. So you look for similarities. And when you speak about artworks, it's also very important to understand why is it unique. So it's a different way to look at data. It's really to understand why this company or why this performance is different from the others. So it's one way maybe to answer your question. Another way is to reintroduce the narrative. What we have with data, we have a structure, and we have a space, and one of the main issues is to move from space to time and to reintroduce the narrative, and the narrative is what is in the gap from one dot to another one. It's what is missing. So maybe this is something that we didn't pay attention to much in digital humanities, but it's really how can we bring back narratives and storytellings in order to link the data between them. And so it's really going back. Yeah, it's really how to move from space to time. I still don't have the solution, but one of the things that I'm working on right now for Harvest, it's really how can we reintroduce time inside these spaces interfaces.
Okay, thank you very much. Andres.
Yeah, well, the other question I actually had before was, so you mentioned something that caught my ear, and it's kind of in my wheelhouse in some sense. When you talked about using machine learning to recognize dancers, you had this slide about the dancers and the bounding boxes around them. And you said something like you have been using human annotators, but they're unreliable and give you different results. So now you use artificial intelligence instead of them. I was kind of wondering about this. So, so what gives rise to this impression that artificial intelligence is more homogeneous or accurate or whatever was meant there than humans? Like, what's your experience with that?
Okay, so I don't mean that you have to replace a human annotation by artificial intelligence in every case. That's not the point. There are different kind of annotations, and sometimes you need well, human annotation, because as a researcher, we do need to annotate our documents. And so this is really something that we do need to do in digital interfaces. And it's not always so easy to do that. So this is one of the points. And another one is that to me, it's important to, what I would like to do in Harvest is to mix human annotations and automatic annotations. It's really to have both annotations inside the same space. Of course, you have to be able to know what is a human annotation and what is an artificial intelligence annotation. And the other point is that when I mentioned that sometimes it's not enough rigorous, is that if you, I was thinking, for example, if you go to TI and to annotate a text with TI, if you give the data set and the text, even with the ontology or the guidelines to annotate a text, you will observe that the interpretation would be different from one researcher to another one. And moreover, because usually to do this kind of task, we use interns or people who are not so well trained. And so you may have some discrepancies in this kind of annotations, but it really depends on the kind of annotations that you want to do and the context of doing it.
You're worried about discrepancies between annotators, human annotators, but you're not worried about discrepancies between different annotation algorithms.
Of course, you could find also discrepancies between different systems of annotation. So you have to be aware of that, of bias and so on. So but yeah, I think it's a complementary approach, and that in some cases, automatic annotations would give you better results, and in some cases, no. So,
but how do you measure better though? Because the only thing you can measure against is human annotations. How do you know when the machine is better than the humans?
It's about consistency in the annotations.
Can we I think there's a fallacy here we're opening, which I think is really difficult, which is we're talking about the standard use of machine learning, which is body pose recognition of humans. And since 2012, when in 4K, or HTTV video signal, they could recognize 100 people and track them, including their poses. That's where we are. So the frame rate at which AI is able to recognize what you're saying is just way beyond what a human with a pencil can do and actually draw stick figures on frames. It's just solved. That is a solved problem, which the computer is way faster. And every discussion above is more difficult. Obviously, if we say, what do you have in your head? For example, I have this example where I have one of these video frame rates things with poses, and then the lower half of the slide, I show 4 different examples, which are very clearly based on the same source as the locon. So you have 3 humans or 1 human where there's snakes in various directions. And there's one of them, which is by Annibale Carracci, which was done at a time where the locon was known, but it looks much closer to the Pergamon altar, which was not dug out. So there must be some kind of other source. So we know that. But these 4 pictures take 6 weeks to dig them out of the library for somebody who has their act together in this particular topic. And there may not be any other person on earth preceding the talk who would be interested in this. And so that is sort of like, I think, the gamut that we're talking about. If you say, oh yeah, we use AI to do poses, and do you agree with me that they're like, yeah, we recognize poses on screen, but then the meaning of it, obviously, computers may be better or worse in recognizing that at speed based on the training of both the computer and the human. And choosing the right algorithm may be just as much an art form as finding the right student who is actually capable of doing the recognition of saying, oh, that looks like the muse Warburg already saw, or whatever. So that is sort of something which I think is a kind of like really important thing. We're talking about these really basic standards in public discussion still, where we say, oh, humans are better or AI is better, when really there's a kaleidoscope of AI algorithms and purposes and uses and cost. And on the other hand, there is obviously a whole diversity of humans who are capable more or less to do certain things, but all of them sort of have a cognitive limit and are bored after staring at 8,000 images a day once. So there's this kind of thing where I think we need a more differentiated discussion, right? So would you agree? There is just like, I mean, the pose recognition thing is not something where we can criticize machines versus humans, because I think at that moment, machines are just way better. Like they're orders of magnitude faster doing this kind of thing, if the resolution is enough. But they can only do it for humans. They cannot do it for horses. They cannot do it because there's not that many videos with horses on them, for example. So I think it's a really interesting kind of like thing where we need to remove ourselves from this general level, I think. Would you agree, or?
Yes, but I think that I agree with you in most of the cases, but it relies on the research questions also, because if you talk with a lab annotator, so people who are trained to do the notation of movements in choreography, they are far more efficient than post-detection in order to note the score of the movement of a performance. So yes, post-detection are they are very impressive, and you can infer a lot of things, but it's still not possible to translate post-detections to lab annotation. Because there is an abstraction level, a synthesis, that is not yet possible so for the computers right now, for the programs. So if you need to detect in a corpora what are the similarities between different kind of movements, it works. If you need to do the score for the choreography, it doesn't.
So this is like, this is similar to the conductor Stokowski famously said, music is more than black marks on white paper. So basically, you're still ending up black marks on white paper and not everything that's in the head of the choreographer, for example. So you need annotation that is human. Interesting. So this is a really interesting thing, because this is harking back to my first question or second question, that there is a resolution limit of what these annotation tools, for example, also can do. And you need decisions at some point, like as a human, to say, what do I actually annotate? And then whatever you annotate is not the piece itself. Like you cannot reproduce reality. Nothing can reproduce the experience of either the audience or the dancer in particular. So that is a sort of like really interesting thing, which I think is also a solace, right? It will never go away. This is like sort of interesting thing. So yeah. Yeah, any more questions? We made almost 2 hours. This is I think this is super exciting, and we're totally looking forward to what you come up with. One last question I have regarding the Mirador with video player and audio player and annotator. Is that something which will come out in like its sort of plainest open source form, where it's not, where it's basically is just a multi-purpose, like WWII extended with video and audio? Is that happening, or is it already there, or?
It will be released, I hope, in November. But I put in the slides the prototype, so you can play with it already somehow. But then we will publish more information soon about the alpha version and so on. So if you're interested and if you want to give feedbacks, it would be great. So yes, I can send you the link.
So there's related to that, like having it in Mirador is one thing, but it's arguably like the video and audio part is not part of the WWII specification, right? So is there a
no,
pathway?
It's not part of the WWII. It will be a plugin of Mirador.
Okay. So, but is there do you have the appetence of sort of like percolating it upstream? So, because ideally a WWII should be ISO standard and W3C, and then every image should be annotatable on the internet. But that is a big dream we all have since 20 years, obviously. But is that something which, like, obviously the video and the audio part need that too? So this is sort of something where everybody's thirsty for. Right?
There is an audio video annotation group inside WWII community.
Okay.
And so we are part of this group. And so we contribute to the discussion of the video annotation inside WWII and for the standard.
Interesting. Yeah. So this is something which...
And there is an annual conference of WWII.
Yeah.
So the next one is at the Getty in June. We will be there. We were there last year to present our research. And so we are in dialogue with the WWII community and the people who are leading the standard.
Super awesome. I have the job to announce also what's happening next week. But first, let's thank Clarisse again. This was an amazing insight into the beginning of an ERC Advanced grant, which obviously we all wait for, like seeing plenty of awesome things coming out. We were very sure that will happen. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation.
Cool. Next week, April 15, we will have a sort of remote connection with the lab of Yusuke Sugano at the Interactive Visual Intelligence Lab in Tokyo, where one of our PhD students is embedded since yesterday. And so we do another classic format already, which we have here in the Open Lab seminar, which is Lab Encounters, which is many-to-many. And we're all looking forward to that. And thank you very much. See you next week, hopefully. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well, next week it will be at 10 in the morning.
And it will be at 10 in the morning. I just was told because we're in Tokyo. Thank you very much.
Bye.